for me. Tell me and I'll do less of that. Just how is the order of this panel?
No.
Oh, I'm just going to ask a question and I'll ask each of you in turn, and we'll go back the other way. Okay, so I'll be starting
We are
with you.
delighted now to move straight into our panel discussion with a great range of experts from different parts of the world who will be talking specifically about the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the drafting process, the kind of backdoor stories around drafting, the work of the committee, and the particular interpretations of the committee around family life. And it's a great privilege to bring together such a range of expertise. The panel will be moderated by our colleague, Professor Eleanor Flynn, who will ask a series of questions and then we'll open up for discussion. I'm just going to very briefly introduce our panelists. A full biography is provided in the booklet, so I will just very briefly introduce you. We have Robert Martin from New Zealand, who is a leading advocate for the rights of people with learning disabilities. He was and is New Zealand's nominee to the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, elected in 2016, and now his third year as a member of the committee as an independent expert. He's particularly advocated and worked on questions around deinstitutionalisation, the right to work, and the right to live a life of one's choice. And he has been very effective in securing reform, policy reform and law reform, and is also the author of a book entitled Becoming a Person. Our second panelist is Sylvia Kwan from Guatemala. Sylvia has been a disability rights activist from a young age and a disability rights defender. She participated in the drafting process of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and served as an independent expert for the committee from 2011 to 2016, including as vice chair 2015 to 2016. And since 2017, Sylvia holds the position of Senior Human Rights Advisor at the International Disability Alliance. Last but not least, we have Eric Rosenthal, who's the founder and executive director of Disability Rights International, one of the first and leading human rights organizations dedicated specifically to the rights of children and adults with disabilities, working with and under international law. And he's been involved for more than 25 years in training, capacity building, and also investigation of abuses of people with disabilities and campaigning around issues around the rights of persons with disabilities. He's also an adjunct professor at American University, Washington College of Law, where he teaches and is part of the Human Rights Academy. From 2015-2016, he held the Dryden Chair in Human Rights at the Georgetown University Law Center and was awarded an honorary doctorate of laws by Georgetown in 2016. I'll hand you over now to Eleanor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, and welcome back everyone from the coffee break. So I'm going to start straight away with a question for all of the panellists. The way that this discussion will work is that I'll pose a question and ask each of the panellists to respond in turn. I just also want to acknowledge up here at the top table with us is Alexia Blatt from People First New Zealand, who's assisting Robert. So my first question to each of you is, what was the most important part of the drafting of the UN Convention in the Ad Hoc Committee for you? Sylvia? I have a mic here to speak. Okay.
So thanks very much, first of all, for inviting me to be here. It is an honor, and to share this panel with my very old friends, Eric and Robert. They're not old, we just have an old friendship. Well, to respond I would think that having such a big number of persons with disabilities participating in the drafting process of the CRPD, where with such a diversity and richness that these persons with disabilities brought into the process as advocates, but also through their lived experiences and as academics and researchers, professionals, and all diversity of people with disabilities, was really groundbreaking within the UN. I mean, before this process was taking place, I don't think the UN ever had such an intense and rich participation of people with disabilities in such a process. So in this way, I think that many of the concepts that were picked up in the text came really from people with disabilities with their lived experiences, and many of the human rights as they were set out in the text that we all know now as the CRPD reflect those concerns, reflect also the response to grave and serious human rights violations that persons with disabilities had been going through for many, many years, and that many of those human rights violations still go on, of course. But in a way, I think that the richness that people with disabilities brought into the text is what makes CRPD the text that we have today as a response to all those issues that were brought up by people with disabilities.
Thank you, Sylvia. I think mine would be, well, I was the only person with a learning disability there for a while, and I didn't think they thought that people with learning disabilities could participate, but I think we proved them wrong. And what happened was we had some other people from other countries, like we had someone from Panama, we had someone from one of the Arab states, we had someone from Africa, and we had a few people from Europe, from Croatia, someone from England, and of course, I was from New Zealand. And I think one of the important articles for me was Article 12, because to me, it wasn't really a convention of people with the highest needs who find it really difficult to communicate actually weren't in the convention. And why have a convention for people with disabilities if there's one whole group that are not there? So I fought tooth and nail for that one to be in there. I think another one was Article 19, living in the community, because people have a right to live in the community, to grow up within a family environment and not be segregated in an institution. And I think that's the other reason why we brought other people, because I didn't have an education, so I couldn't talk about that. I didn't grow up within a family environment, so I couldn't talk about that. But I sure could talk about institutionalisation. I could really talk about that because I lived in an institution as a 80-month-old baby. So, that for me is, and I just don't think we should have institutions. They're a thing from the 17th century, the 18th century, but not now. We need to get rid of them. They're a blight on society, and I just think that. Also, education is important to me. I think I said to UNICEF, and this lady said, "Oh, those special people." And I got up and said, well, there's nothing special about being special. And there isn't. Because when I think of it, what happens to people who leave school? There's no special jobs, there's no special community, and there's no special society. So why do we have special for? And also this whole thing about institutionalisation, I was saying it's called institutions aren't about bricks and mortar. It's about the thoughts, feelings and actions of others that make it so.
Thank you. My name is Eric Rosenthal. Again, it's a real pleasure to be here. And if we're going to pick our favorite article and how transformative it was, I think I'd agree with you, Robert, on Article 19 and the right to live in the community. I mean, so much of what we wanted to do when we set out to draft this treaty was to fix the problems of previous treaties, looking at the way the existing human rights framework was limited. And at my organization, Disability Rights International, we started 25 years ago, before there was a disability treaty. And we were looking to use the human rights law to stop the most serious abuses we could find anywhere in the world. And we found those abuses in institutions. We found them in orphanages for children. We found them in psychiatric facilities. We found them in social care homes and medical facilities where people were locked away. And at first, when we started out, we thought we could fix the torture, the abuse, the dehumanizing treatment that we found inside the institutions. But we quickly discovered, and this was a discovery very much drawn from the disability rights movements and civil rights movements that came before us, is that you can't fix problems within institutions. You have to get people into society. But a lot of the old treaties were built on the assumptions, well, we can provide better care, we can stop torture, we can make suitable institutions. In fact, some of the old conventions built into them had the assumption that some people had to be in institutions. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, for example, in Article 20, says that children could be placed in suitable institutions. Well, institutions cannot be made suitable, and no child should ever be in an institution. And that's why the protections and that transformation that we got out of the convention, the idea that there's a right to live in the community, to me, changed everything.
Thank you. So, related to the points that you've been making, I just want to ask about the decision that was taken during the negotiation of the treaty. It's very clear when we read the treaty text that it's about the rights of people with disabilities, and sometimes it talks about families, but only in the context of the right of people with disabilities to have a family and not to be separated from their family. It doesn't talk about the rights of families of persons with disabilities as a separate thing. Was that controversial? Do you remember? Was there a lot of discussion about that? Did anyone feel that there wasn't enough attention paid to families in the text of the convention? Sylvia?
Yes, certainly. There was a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion around whether families of persons with disabilities should be included as title holders within the treaty or not. But I think finally the outcome of the CRPD was that the real title holders of the CRPD, of the human rights that were protected by CRPD, were persons with disabilities, that families could have a very important role in fulfilling those rights, but that human rights belonged and were to be fulfilled for persons with disabilities themselves. I would go even a little bit ahead in time, and for those of you who are familiar with the work of the CRPD committee, the CRPD committee adopted last year its general comment number 7 regarding the participation of persons with disabilities through their representative organizations. in decision-making processes, and it does develop a lot on how families can participate in facilitating or in supporting the participation of persons with disabilities and complying with the rights enshrined in CRPD. So I think that, yes, it is still controversial. I think that even today, after more than 12 years of the CRPD being adopted, families still fight to be recognized as title holders under CRPD. But I think that we should be also very clear that even though there is not a denial of the role that families play to fulfill with the rights, that persons with disabilities are those people, are those persons that are the real title holders of these rights.
Thank you, Sylvia. Again, I totally agree with what Sylvia said. Yeah, it was quite stressful at times being at the being there. But I think one of the really important things is families do need assistance. There's no two ways about it. You know, I know from my experience where the doctor said, oh, Chuck, yeah, well, I didn't say Chuck, but said, put your son in an institution, throw away the key and forget you ever had him, basically. But that was, I don't blame my family for that, I blame the system. It was the system that let us down, and I'm afraid even today, the system is letting us down. You know, I think with other DPOs, I'd have to say they certainly didn't want the word family there. But yeah, and I think the other thing that I ask is 4.3. And I often ask countries, oh, does your country support people with learning disabilities to have their own organisation? And I'll have to say, still in a lot of countries, people with learning disabilities are invisible. For one, they don't answer the questions I ask, or they say, well, we sent them to a holiday to run a summer holiday to an institution, and we sent them to run a holiday to another institution. I just about burst out laughing, because if you had said that to my friends in New Zealand, they would have, well, I can't repeat it here what they would have said, but it wouldn't have been very nice, because I have to say that, you know, we've shut all our big institutions in New Zealand. There's not one left. I mean, we still have many ones though. You know, the houses that they think people live. And I think for me it's about people making their own decisions of with whom they want to live with and where they want to live with. Because believe me, we still stick people with the same disabilities, like people with eyelids altogether or people with autism altogether, and we just haven't learned from our mistakes of the past. We still do the things that we did 30, 40, even 50 years ago. And I've been involved in people with intellectual disability for the last 60 years. So, I mean, I haven't just kind of broken into it, I've been part of it. And I've been into other countries. We've even closed institutions in Australia, believe it or not, as well. So I'll hand you over to the next person.
Thank you. Well, the transformation of the focus to people with disabilities rather than the family as the stakeholder, interesting twist on that which is that Article 23 provides a right to protection against the breakup of a family based upon either the disability of the parent or the disability of the child. So if you're protecting the family from a breakup from parents with disabilities having their children removed, you are in a sense protecting families, and you're protecting families of people with disabilities. And one of the very interesting implications of that is that children who do not have a label of disability are also then protected by the convention. In fact, it's one of the very few places where there are explicit reference to the rights of non-disabled people in the convention. And I think that's really profound. It's important to realize how not only, what's the word, not interdisciplinary, interconnected the rights are, but that these rights fundamentally protect society as a whole by protecting the rights of people with disabilities. Around the world, there are at least 10 million children in orphanages. And of those children, 80 to 98% have parents. Would those children be in orphanages if their parents hadn't been discriminated against and had the opportunity to keep their children? Parents are labeled as unable to keep their children, as being inadequate parents, as being bad parents. So often, we don't even think of that necessarily as a form of disability discrimination. But I believe that it is, and that in protecting the parents, you're protecting the children. And Article 19, which provides a right to support in the community, if Article 19 is fully supported for parents, vast numbers of children with or without disabilities will also be protected.
May I add something?
Yeah, Sylvia?
Thank you. Yes, I forgot also to add that something that's very groundbreaking with the adoption of CRPD is Article 12 and the recognition of full legal capacity for all persons with disabilities. And I think this is very important when considering whether people with disabilities and or their families are the title holders of the rights, because in a way, before CRPD was adopted, many times people with disabilities who were denied their legal capacity were represented by their families. And somehow this was a difficulty when people with disability wanted to exercise their rights. So in a way, Article 12 is of course, interrelated directly with Article 23, and the way that people with disabilities can now fully exercise their rights in line with CRPD is a way of not denying the role that families play in this exercise, but rather, as General Comment number 7 reiterates, is that families can play a supportive role in the exercise of the rights of persons with disabilities.
Thank you. So Sylvia and Robert, you both mentioned how important it was to have people with disabilities in the drafting directly. And of course, DPOs, which are disabled people's organisations representing people with disabilities. How diverse were those organisations? For example, did you hear much from gay and lesbian people with disabilities, bi and trans and intersex people with disabilities, or were the family organisations who were also there, were they also diverse and inclusive in terms of the kinds of families they represented, or were these things that came up in the negotiation?
I must confess that I did not see too much advocacy from the LGBTIQ advocacy groups. I think it was very much centered on disability rights and maybe some kinds of intersectionality with other characteristics like ethnic minorities, migrants and refugees. But I must confess I did not hear much about LGBTI back then. It has been brought up later after the CRPD was adopted, but I do feel that maybe this was one of the things that that was not taken up so strongly, or maybe it's even absent from CRPD, if we can say that.
Thanks again, Sylvia, and I have to agree with what Sylvia said. There was no LEBT, BTIQ there, groups there. I think the other thing that kind of Sylvia forgot was Indigenous groups of people. I mean, there were some there, but yeah, it was a lot of people with disabilities, and even us didn't have full agreement with everything, did we, Sylvia? Because I think things like education was one. There was another one about workshops was another. In my own experience, I have to say I don't really like them. I mean, we still have them, but I think they're as bad as institutions. I'm afraid to say, and I think they are just a glorified babysitting service. That's what I think they are. I mean, people do. No, we don't. People don't work in these places so much. They do things like art and all that kind of stuff. But I think making the convention real was as we had to go through those things and discuss, for ourselves of because I think when you really think of it, I think people with learning disabilities have never been part of this kind of thing before, and we're still kind of, I think other groups have been around for a lot longer than what we have. So we got a lot to learn, but I think being part and parcel of the disability world, and I think that's really important too, is that we are part of the disability society, and I think that's really important, that we need support from our friends of other disabilities, and I think that to me is something that's really important.
I think you answered it.
Oh, okay. Actually, Robert, can I just ask you a follow-up question? So you mentioned that there were family groups there as well as people with disabilities themselves. Were there ever tensions or disagreements between what people with disabilities wanted to see in the convention and what maybe families wanted to see, or were people able to work together?
Yeah, there was. I remember one occasion where I think two parents, I think some of the other DPOs kind of asked, "What the hell are you here for?" And they said, "Well, one had a daughter there with quite high support needs, and another lady had a son who had autism and could not speak, and neither could the other girl." But I mean, that's why they brought them there, to show people that there are people with learning disabilities that need the support of their families, and I think that's why they kind of brought them there, and that's, I think, what the kind of tensions were. But I think in the finish, we kind of got over it, because I think they saw the need for families to be there so that they could support their son or daughter, because I mean, we can speak for them. There's no two ways about that, and that's really important. But I think people with learning disabilities, we kind of don't always agree with families, but that's just going to be a fact of life. I mean, we have our own way of doing things, and families have their way of doing things. But I think we just got to learn to accept each other's difference, because we're all different. We're not the same. And I think that's what used to happen in the past, is that people thought that people with learning disabilities were all the same, but we're as different as their fingerprints. Yeah, Sylvia.
Did Sylvia or Eric want to comment on that?
Yes, of course, there were many family members also during the negotiation process, and there were, of course, many discussions around whether families should be included explicitly within the text of the CRPD or not. But I think that we kind of reached, all of those who were participating in the process kind of reached this agreement that the rights of persons with disabilities were urgently needed to be recognized, and more than the rights of the families as title holders, but rather that we were discussing the urgent need that full legal capacity and the other rights of persons with disabilities needed to be recognized. Eric, you want to?
Nothing to add.
Okay. So you've all mentioned some of the key rights in the Convention, like Article 12, Article 19 and Article 23 on the family. So there are lots of ways in which the Convention protects these rights. We've talked about the right of the child not to be separated from the parents, whether the parents have a disability or whether the child has a disability. But there are also other rights we haven't spoken about in detail yet, like the right to marry, the right to form a family, and the right to make reproductive decisions. Were there objections to including some of those rights in the Convention from anyone, and who maybe objected, or what were the basis of, why did they object? Why did some people maybe not want those rights in the Convention, and how did you convince them that they needed to be there?
Yes, certainly there is a phrase within Article 23 about the right for people with disabilities to retain their fertility. And that, of course, responds to the widespread forced sterilization of persons with disabilities, which is something that's even if still in many today in many countries of the world there are laws prohibiting forced sterilization. It does happen. It is a widespread practice still in most parts of the world, and it is, of course, founded on the idea that people with disabilities shouldn't have children, that they're not, a person with a disabilities is not going to be a good parent, and I would think that those who would oppose this phrase to be included in CRPD did not come from the disability community itself, but rather from service providers and from other type of institutions and organizations who were actually supporting that sterilization of persons with disabilities is something that should be kept because they think it's still good.
Yeah, this is a real toughie, because I think from our perspective, people with learning disabilities, I think there's still out there that people don't see us having this right to, one thing to get married, two, to have children, and to raise a family of our own. I mean, that's still alive and well out there. Still a lot of people don't agree with it, but the thing is, I'm married. I've been married for nearly 32 years. Okay, we haven't got kids, but that was our decision. So, but I know people where I actually live have had children and have still got them, and they look after them, and they actually haven't had them taken away. But often people with learning disabilities often have their children taken away from them, because as Sylvia said just before that, they don't think they can look after them. But I think, we've got to have things like, what's that, family, the things about teaching people,
Courses on parenting.
yeah, courses on parenthood and, all that, how to raise a family and all that kind of thing. And I think we need that to be part of our sector, so people can actually look after their children really well. So we don't have the things of taking them off them and, shutting them away and things like that. And also, the right to be born. I mean, this is one that nobody really wanted to touch with a 40-foot barge pole, but of course, New Zealand being New Zealand, we kind of brought that up because we still, in some countries, allow sterilisation for people with some types of disability, and that just shouldn't be allowed. I mean, to me, it's a woman's right to choice. But I think also what happens is the doctors don't give the right information to the mothers. That if they're going to have a child with a disability, they need to be given the right information so they can actually make their choice themselves. Yeah, and some countries in the world have 100% abortion for Down syndrome as well. And I mean, people with Down syndrome are just like you and me. They're really unique people and they're really great people. And I think to eradicate one type of disability is absolutely wrong. Where the hell are we heading to? What are we doing here? It's morally wrong to actually make one kind of people with disability extinct, because that's basically what they're doing.
Well, you had asked about pushback, and I think that probably the most controversial element of the convention where we got the most pushback was around Article 12 and choice and legal capacity, which, very closely relates to the issue of the right to the family, the right to reproductive choice. If people with disabilities can't make decisions for themselves, they can't decide to have children, they can't decide when they want to have children, they can't decide whether or not to have a family. And so in the end, if you're going to have community integration, protecting the right of people with disabilities to make choices about their lives is just essential for all aspects of community living. And yet, the real pushback happened around that. And I think it really speaks to people's deepest sense of prejudice, perhaps, of looking at people with disabilities based upon their limitations rather than their strengths, that believe that they cannot really do it. And I think that the pushback to the pushback was coming up with creative ideas for how people would make decisions. And the idea of a right to supported decision making, that a person makes decisions through community support, through friends helping them, even through legal processes that support them through those decisions, was a way that I think fundamentally changed people's perceptions. And I think that very discussion was a learning process. I saw it happen during the course of the discussions at the convention, kind of an aha moment among many of the government representatives who started out saying, well, you can't expect people with disabilities to do this. And when they started to realize in very practical sense, oh, wow, they actually can do it, I think that was transformative. It was probably key to the protection of many other rights.
So now that we have the convention for over 10 years and we have the UN committee that Sylvia, you used to serve on, and Robert, you serve on now, states have a lot more guidance about how to do things correctly. So all of the rights we've just been talking about, the committee has been very clear to states about what needs to change, but there is still a lot of misunderstandings. So there are a lot of things that are, as you've described, still going on that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago. So these kinds of rights that we've been talking about, what do you think are the biggest misunderstandings that states still have about how they can be achieved, and how can we correct those misunderstandings?
Well, I fully agree also with what Eric just explained about the pushback. It's still going on, of course, and there is a big movement from professionals to stop the institutionalization process, or to rather, I would say, disguise some forms of institutionalization as not real institutionalization. For example, instead of having an institution with 1,000 people, they would create small group homes with 10 or 4 people, which, according to the CRPD, would still be considered institutions, but professionals would not call them that, because they look like nice homes and family type, quote, family type, unquote. And I think that there's still big challenges facing around state complying with providing the necessary supports for people to really be able to live in the community, to really be integrated, living the way that they choose to live. So this is still a big, big challenge. But regarding also to Article 23, even though it seems that it's very clear that persons with disabilities should have the right to live in their family, there's still many countries where when a family, when a child with a disability is born into a family, many times these families are forced to place this child under institutional care, not because they want to, but because services are usually only provided that way. So this is still a big challenge for states to really understand that even if they don't see it that way, it is forced institutionalization, and it is separating families. And families, I mean, children will grow up within these institutions until they're a certain age, and then not really be integrated into their own biological or original family. So there is still a lack of understanding that when services are provided like in this way, in a segregated manner, it is still creating separation of families. It is still segregating people with disabilities and institutionalizing them. And these, of course, are still major challenges.
Thanks, Sylvia. Thank you for bringing up, the smaller group homes, because to me, whichever way you look at it, they're still an institution. People are not making choices or decisions in their lives. When they go out, they go all out together. I mean, where's the individualism of people? We are all individuals. We're not groups. We're just one person. And that's a really big misunderstanding, about countries think that small group homes are lovely, and I think they're fantastic. Well, I'd say to them, go and live in one and find out, because you won't think that afterwards. And I think another big one is the difference between plain language and easy read as well. is that, people talk about accessibility. Accessibility is also about information. And information is really important. We know that Easy Reader is not only for people with learning disabilities, it can be for migrants, it can be for, I know in New Zealand, the people who are deaf use it as well. So it's and Indigenous people too can probably use it, because I know from my experience in New Zealand that they've often been in foster care and big welfare homes and stuff like that. So they haven't had the education. So, and families also, not shouldn't always speak up for us. We can actually speak for ourselves. And the other thing I want to say is, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came out after the Second World War. So why has it taken it so long for one, women to have their rights, children to have their rights, Indigenous people to have their rights, and people with disability to have their rights? I mean, it's only in the last 11 years that people with disabilities have got their human rights. So why has it taken so long to do this? I asked that question there when we started doing this, and nobody could answer the question, unfortunately.
Both Sylvia and Robert mentioned this issue, which is a really hot topic right now. Robert and I were just on a panel last week in New York at the Conference of States Parties on this issue of group homes. As one who's been working for 25 years to fight the horrible abuses in institutions, it's been heartbreaking for me to see how, when people were put away in big, old, horrible, filthy orphanages, the world was outraged. But the response has often been, instead of getting children out of institutions into families, to build nice, pretty, clean little places, call them group homes, call them residential care. And the truth is, it's much harder to fight those because they seem clean, they seem nice. People think, well, kids are being taken care of there. We've learned through science that the nicest, cleanest group home is still detrimental for children. In terms of what we've learned through the science of child development, every human being needs to form emotional attachments to another person who they can love. And if you don't have the ability to form emotional attachments, if you don't learn that at an early age, you may never be able to learn it later on. It really is deeply psychologically damaging. And at older ages, there are cognitive development that happens in a context of a family. People fall behind cognitively when they're in a group home or in an institution. At last week in New York, Robert said it best when you talked about how they put you in a facility and they said, call this person your mom or call this person your dad. And I think you said, I wasn't stupid. I know the difference between a staff member and a person who really is my mom or my dad. And that's the difference between a group home and a family. It's not, if the staff person, tucks you into bed and then goes home to their real children, the kid knows the difference. So it's tremendously, tremendously damaging to just build a nice, pretty building and think that the child is taken care of. It really is not. And it's an immediate threat on a large scale. And that's why the subtle differences in language really matter, and why the Convention on the Rights of the Child falls short. It's been interpreted to say, I mentioned earlier that it allows for suitable institutions. Well, the interpretations adopted by the Committee on the Rights of the Child say, well, they have to be family-like. A family, is it really family-like if the staff goes home at the end of the day? You can call it family-like, but family-like is not family. And that's where the CRPD is really different. In Article 23, it says that if you can't keep the child in the immediate family, then put them in the extended family. And if not in the extended family, they have to be in some form of family environment, a family, not a family-like facility. The language is subtle, but it's important, that there is no alternative to the right to family, and it's never okay to put children in institutions or residential care under the CRPD. The right to family really is protected. And unfortunately, this is the 30th anniversary of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and it's the 10th anniversary of something called the UN Guidelines for Alternative Care. The UN Guidelines for Alternative Care of Children were drafted to implement the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and they were drafted with the assumption, they say in them, that all institutions, there needs to be a plan for the closure of institutions, but that residential care is essential and needs to be maintained. Well, the UN Special Rapporteur on Disability has now said the UN guidelines on alternative care do not protect the right to family under the CRPD, and they need to be revised. They need to be fixed. It's not okay. And so we unfortunately now have two competing legal systems, one under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and one under the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And the UN General Assembly this year, to mark those anniversaries, is going to adopt a new resolution on the protection of children without parental care. And so there's a great risk right now that if the General Assembly uses the CRC, the Children's Rights Model, and uses language out of that model that says, okay, if it's strictly necessary, you can put kids in residential care, there's a danger that some of the newly recognized rights under the CRPD will be lost. So we in the disability community are organizing, and it's something happening this year, and it's happening right now. And if you in your own countries are working on these issues, and you've seen similar problems of moving from institutions to smaller, cleaner facilities that are still really institutions, please come up, please talk to me. I'd love to be in touch with you because we're doing organization around this right now. 10 different disability groups have signed a new statement that calls for recognition of the right to the family and calls for the General Assembly to accept the CRPD definition and not to compromise on this issue. So the subject of this conference, the right to family, is a really hot topic. We've got to get organized about it, and we've got to stand up for these principles which cannot be compromised.
Thank you. So at this point, I think we're going to open up to the floor for questions, and I just want to remind everyone that Robert will be speaking again on a panel tomorrow about the right to live in the community and the right to live independently. So we will be having more opportunities to discuss these issues, but I want to open it up now for any questions that people might have about the drafting. I can see already some questions.